Nice to see some of you I haven't seen in a while. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. You know, Reverend John wanted me to wear a costume, I think. And because he said something like, oh, I can't wait to see your costume. I don't do costumes. However, what was funny is I dug out of my closet this marvelous piece, and it reminded me when we had our church in Boulder that there's a group called the Colorado Ministers, obviously, because we were all in Colorado, and many of whom were women. And we almost tried to outdo ourselves, each other, with goddess wear. And we would go to the different events, Asilomar and different things, and Reverend Barbara models goddess wear regularly, quite lovely. And so we would always buy these one or two new things every year. And then if someone said to you, oh, I love when you wear that, you know you've worn it too often. So this was my capitulation to a costume. I do feel very goddessy today. So this Sunday's Halloween, as many of you are aware, and it's a real interesting time, I think, where Halloween came from. And so I was intrigued to even learn a little bit more about it. I kind of knew, but I refreshed my memory for the teen class because I wanted to talk to them about, the origins of Halloween. And it's the time when they say the veil is the thinnest between the living and the dead, when, what caused much fear 2,000 years ago in particular in the Celtic Ireland, thank you for the Irish blessing, if you will, that the spirits of the dead could come through. And they sometimes wreaked havoc, so there was some fear mixed in with that. And so the costume idea and the bonfires and all of that and kind of the ritual was to keep the ghosts away. At least that was what the thought was at the time. And I think it's really interesting because there was a lot of fear then, and there still is, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but when we go from the longer days of summer and the light and the, all the outdoor stuff, and then we start to close down into the shorter days of, as winter approaches, and the light is less. The sun's going down sooner, the harvest is kind of over or passing, if you will. And I think that there was an underlying anxiety at the time, even though, like we know, right, that the sun comes back. We know that, and we know that it's a natural cycle. But I do think there's just a wee bit of unsettledness as the days get shorter. We're hunkering down. I actually love that, sitting in front of the fire, and it gets darker sooner, and I can kind of stay inside. And at the same time, I get anxious because I go, how much snow are we going to have? What about snow removal? And, what about all this driving and things like that? And how cold is it going to get? And is the power going to go out? And, just these little things that sometimes come up. And I think it was much worse many, many years ago. And, we're pretty comfortable up here. We have everything. We have all the amenities. But it could change in a nanosecond, really. Like, do you remember the year that the power in Ketchum went out for, was it 1 day, 3 days?
A year.
Yeah, it felt like it. It was pretty intense. And in just that, just in that moment, things change. And so anyway, I think there's always that little bit underneath. But, and I was looking at the actual holiday is Samhain, and it was also mixed with All Hallows Eve, and which is All Saints Day. So Samhain is the night before, and All Saints Day, and they bring in the saints and all the blessed ones and the ancestors and so on. So it's a really powerful holiday, I think. So when we wear costumes, do you think you're warding off the evil ghosts? We don't. And when we carve a pumpkin, and usually the carvings, now they're everything, and they're getting pretty creative, they always have. But when you carve a pumpkin, it is also there to ward off, right? It's to set outside and kind of ward off any untoward kind of activity. And so I find it fascinating when you look back at what the real holiday is, and what it means and how we still observe it in many ways. And I wish we had a bonfire, because I think that's also a wonderful way. They lit the bonfires to ward off the spirits. So maybe we'll have a bonfire. I think we are going to have, good news flash, we're going to have a fire pit, I believe, for Christmas Eve outside before we do the inside service. So that should be pretty incredible. We had so much fun last year. So this is a really good time to, as I said, hunker down. I use that term. This is a really good time to go within as the days get shorter. And it's a good time to take stock. It's a good time for introspection. It's a good time to harvest, if you will, and not just the garden harvest, but this inner harvest, and to tap into the presence of our ancestors. And I think that that's the veil. The title of this was The Veil is Thin Between, which I have comments along. I actually have 3 veils. I could have renamed this 3 veils, so we're going to talk about 3. But the veil is thin between. It means that there's a permeable energy where we can access. I think we can access it all year round, but let's just play with the holiday. And I think it's easier when the days are shorter. I think it's easier to find more time to go within. And when we talked in the teen class, I did talk about bringing forth the wisdom of your ancestors, and whether it's through your family, those that have gone before, or through, in this case, sports heroes, or those kinds of admirable figures, that you can bring forth that wisdom. And it doesn't even have to be through a book. We get it through books, and we get it through study and so on, but it's also just through tapping in and calling it forth. And I think that when we practice our spiritual activities, our spiritual practice our spiritual practice, that's sort of redundant, but makes sense, that's how we can pull forth that wisdom and we can tap into it. And I think that there's a lot of benefit to doing that, specifically to call on our ancestors. There's so much wisdom there. So that's veil number 1. So I want to say we all need that guidance, especially going into the winter, and especially, I don't know, I like talking about the world situation, but I'll say especially with the world situation, we need more sustenance from our ancestors, I believe. So I want to talk about a second veil, which I didn't write about in the blog, and it's interesting. It has to do with the book of Revelations, and I am not a Bible scholar, but I've been intrigued with the book of Revelations and the word apocalypse. And so when I love to study where words came from, and apocalypse actually means, in 9 out of 10 dictionaries, it means unveiling. It means revelation. It means uncovering. It's from a Greek word, and I can't pronounce the Greek, so I won't try. But what's interesting is that it's used almost synonymously with Armageddon, because the book of Revelations talks about the return of Christ and the battle of Armageddon, and I'm not sure exactly of the order of things. I pulled up an outline, but it was beyond the scope of my mind at the time. However, I am going to study the book of Revelations, because I just found it to be incredibly fascinating. So I'll let you know. Maybe by December, when I talk again, I'll uplift you with the book of. Anyway, so the thing about the apocalypse is that it's usually disclosing something very important, and that was hidden from us, or secret, or on purpose, I guess what I'm saying. And so it provides a vision, and here's what it says: a vision of heavenly secrets that can make sense of earthly realities. So there's a lot of interpretation on how to make sense, how to pull from Scripture, which I'm becoming fascinated with, again, as I've already said, with how we can interpret it to apply and provide wisdom to what we're experiencing at any given time. What they've said when I was in ministerial studies and seminary, they talked a lot about the metaphysical purpose of the Bible, or metaphysical interpretation of the Bible, better said, and how it's really our spiritual journey, the whole thing. So I thought that was interesting. And the other thing I discovered is that the apocalypses can be viewed as good, evil, ambiguous, or neutral, depending on the religion or belief system, or frankly, the dictionary. Because one dictionary defined it only as, without going into the origins of the word, a great disaster, a sudden and very bad event that causes fear, loss, and destruction. So that's where the word has become used with. And one of the things that I love is that at the end, see if I can get those, chapters 21 something, they talk about in the book, and it is the final book in Scripture, a new heaven and a new earth that replace the old earth. There's no more suffering or death. And that's, the prophecy. God comes to dwell with humanity in the New Jerusalem. There's a description of the New Jerusalem, and then the river of life and the tree of life appear for the healing of nations and peoples. The curse of sin is ended. It's very uplifting. If you can get through all the battles and all the violence and stuff, it's like, oh, okay, phew, it comes up. And some of the things that are happening that I've been observing, and, I subscribe to maybe over 50 different news sources, and not just ABC, CNN, or Fox. I rarely listen to those anymore. I just get the headlines. But there's a wealth of information out there. And there is a lot of revelation going on about corruption and different things that are happening. And it's coming out like never before. At least we're tapped into it through all of these 50-some-odd news sources that I subscribe to. And one of the things I came across, may or may not be of interest, is a documentary recently released, very well researched. And in fact, in the documentary, the gentleman shows how he got to these conclusions, the searches and the responses. And the documentary is called Monopoly. I don't know if anyone's heard of it. Who Owns the World? By Tim Gielan, I believe. Gielan. And I watched it, and my little eyes got really wide. And it was fascinating. Again, it was very believable. I saw the searches, we'll see. But it boiled down to everything, food, agriculture, manufacturing, healthcare, pharmaceutical, clothing, everything is owned by about 3 or 4 investment firms. You've heard of BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, and some Berkshire Hathaway. These 4 own just about everything. You can trace it up. And then the shareholders is the Gates Foundation, the Clinton Foundation, and the Bush family, and some Rockefeller stuff. They own everything, from clothing to airplanes to farms to food and so on. If you don't believe me, it's a fascinating documentary. So I just wanted to throw that out there. These things are coming to the forefront, I think, on purpose, so we can maybe make a new earth, make new systems. Maybe, it's a lot of work, but maybe. A new Jerusalem, that would be lovely. So anyway, because I was talking about the different veils, I really wanted to talk about that one, because a veil is being lifted in some of these instances where we're getting to see through some things. And I have a very inquisitive mind, and so I do follow some of those. And some people will call it a rabbit hole, and some people will say I'm just, curious. So anyway, so I'm throwing that out there. For those of you who care to study further, or anyone wants a link, I think it's on Rumble, the documentary was very enlightening and not really that uplifting. So right now, with the two veils, I'm going to go to the third veil. And I think this is the one we need the most to understand that we can lift and dissolve, and it's actually not really there except by our perception. And it's based on what Ernest Holmes has talked about is the veil between spirit and matter, the veil between divinity and humanity. And you know, he had an experience that I'm going to read from here before I close, where he had this cosmic consciousness realization. But he talks before that, because that wasn't until 1959, he talks a lot about dissolving the veil, or understanding that the veil is as thin as we want it to be, or as that we believe it to be. In other words, we're not separate. We're not separate from spirit, from life, from each other, from God. We're actually incarnate, God incarnate, if you will. So I'm reminded, and it takes being reminded, that we're closer to the divine than we believe, and that we are, in truth, not veiled. Again, not restricted by the veil. Let's put it that way. And I almost wore one so I could, lift it, and I couldn't find anything that I could see through. I thought it would be kind of dangerous, right? Anyway, so I want to read you something from Ernest Holmes' Creative Mind and Success, and it's from his essay on ideas of the infinite. And I just kind of pulled a couple things out. But he starts off by saying, where do all the inventions come from? Everything that's ever come into humanity comes direct from the mind of God. There's nothing else it could come from. Where does the harmony of music come from? Where could it originate except in God's mind? A musician's ear is attuned to harmony, and it's caught straight from life itself and interprets it. The musician interprets it to the world. I bear witness. We're surrounded by the music of the spheres, but few ever catch the sound. We're so filled with trouble that divine melody is never heard. If we could see, if we could hear, if we could understand, if we only realize the presence of the all, what could we not do? When a great thought springs up in the mind of an individual, when a great work of art is wrought by the artist, it is simply a sign that the veil is very thin, that the individual has caught a glimpse of reality. I love that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about many of you, some of you may know this, about the church dedication. I know the Reverend Grabowski certainly do. Where Ernest Holmes, our founder and the author of The Science of Mind, had his cosmic consciousness experience. How many of you know about it? How many of you've sort of heard about it? Okay. How many have heard the recording? I've tried to find it, and I thought I had it as a graduation gift. It's a real scratchy, it was in 1959, and I couldn't find it, so I'm going to read it to you here in a minute. But at a church dedication in the Whittier Church, I believe, Ernest Holmes' live lecture was recorded. And it was captured, his moment, this incredible moment. And the people who witnessed it said his face was, aglow, and he kind of even stumbled after it happened to go back to his seat. And he was with his friend, Bendel, I believe. And they drove home together. It was after his wife Hazel had died, so he was living alone. And so his friend drove home with him and said that he kept him awake all night talking, because he was just like, whoa, what happened? This is amazing. And it's in the book, the report on this is called The Anatomy of Healing Prayer in the Holmes Papers. And so it's all written out in this book. So I reread it again last night. And he said to his friend, while I was talking, I had the semblance of everything turning into a sort of shimmering light. And I imagined looking down at myself talking, and he said he saw everyone down there as a pool of light as well as himself. I actually had the feeling that I was part of the stars, that I was part of everything, that I was part of the whole movement, the push and pull of the universe, but with a greater sense of self-awareness. So it tells me that this veil that he talked about for most of his teachings, using different words, is as thin as we believe it is. And I'm repeating that because it's really important to understand that we have that access too. We can have this cosmic consciousness experience in a moment when we believe it. It's there. It's already there for us. There is no separation, just the limitation which we can impose upon it ourselves. We already are that consciousness. Ernest Holmes says in multiple ways, the invisible passes into visibility through our faith in it. So it's not like we make it up or that we have to create it or that we have to do anything except have faith in it and be open and allow. And maybe let go of some troubles so that we raise up our frequency, if you will, our vibration, to be receptive, to be in a loving space, an allowing space, or what I call even a healing space. So we raise ourselves up and then we're open to this. And I'm going to read what I wrote. I think I wrote this in the blog. But I love it. It came to me. It says, we are of the living organism that we call humanity. We are of the living organism that we call humanity, the living being that we call the earth. We are of the shimmering stars and the planets and the galaxies and the entire cosmos and beyond. We are the cosmic consciousness. We are the light of God and the love of God and the presence of God right here and right now. And our only responsibility is to know it and allow ourselves to express it, to allow it to inform our lives, to call on it like we call on our ancestors. I say call on God first, because then all the ancestors are all part of that consciousness. And so I'm going to close with this as kind of my closing prayer. I'm going to read Ernest Holmes' experience. And I want you to imagine him standing before an audience of about 400. And I'm going to read the last paragraph or so of his speech. I'm not reading the whole thing because that was lengthy. And again, it's you can read it in the Holmes papers, Anatomy of Healing Prayer. We are dedicated to the concept that the pure in heart shall see God here, that the meek will inherit the earth now, that one with truth is a majority, that every one of us in the secret place of the Most High, with a center on one's own consciousness, has the secret with the eternal, with the everlasting, with the Almighty, and with the ineffable. God and I are one. And I see you doing this, he said. And I see you uniting in one great hymn of praise, one great union of effort, one crescendo of song, and one enveloping light of consciousness. I see it. Oh God, the veil is thin between. We do mingle with the hosts of heaven. I see it, and I shall speak no more. So join me now in just feeling the vibration of that. I swear Ernest Holmes' energy was here. Whew, I have goosebumps. God bumps. No veil here. So knowing that there is this consciousness that permeates everything, and it is divine, and it is loving, and it is light, and grace, and power, and healing, and comfort. It is everything, and everything that is needed, everything that is wanted, and it is everything present right here and right now. More than enough of that consciousness, of that energy, of that frequency is right here in this room, and is right here with everyone that is listening to this message. There is love, there is light, there is grace, and I am ever so grateful to know this, to share this, to transmit this, and to be one with this. And with gratitude, with love, and the feeling of being so blessed to be here right now in this moment, this sacred moment, I simply say, and so it is. Amen.